GoForThe2.com. We're back for the 2016 college football season. What better way to kick it off than with our Week 1 predictions? Let's get right into it. Great matchups from top to bottom, starting at 12 noon on Saturday between West Virginia and Missouri. Intriguing Big 12 SEC matchup that I really think favors the Mountaineers in this game. You look at Missouri's offense overall in 2015, very mediocre. They only averaged 13 points per game and 116 rushing yards on the ground. That made their offense one-dimensional, put a lot of pressure on quarterback Drew Lock. You look at West Virginia overall, a very balanced attack offensively led by quarterback Skylar Howard and running back Russell Shell. But more importantly, it was the West Virginia defense that really made strides in the 2015 season. They only allowed 158 rushing yards per game and forced teams to methodically work down the field. When you look at this matchup with quarterback Drew Lock of Missouri, I think this game is very close early on, but in the end, West Virginia does pull away for a double-digit victory. I think they win this game in the area of 17 to 20 points. I think the offense of West Virginia is the difference. They're balanced with Skylar Howard and Russell Shell. That will put a lot of pressure on Missouri's offense to respond, especially on the road, even though Missouri does have 8 returning starters on defense, a defense that only allowed 13 points per game. This is head coach Barry Odom's first game as head coach. Think it's a tough one, and Missouri drops this game by 20 to West Virginia in Morgantown. Another intriguing matchup, Georgia and North Carolina. Georgia's going to start true freshman quarterback Jacob Eason. You look at Georgia overall in the 2015 season, they won 10 ball games against opponents with a combined overall record of 51-72 overall, or a 414 winning percentage. The 3 games that they lost in 2015 to Alabama, Florida, and Tennessee, those teams were 33-9 overall. But more importantly, in those matchups, Georgia's defense did not respond in terms of shutting down the run. They allowed 218 rushing yards per game in those losses in 2015. When you look at North Carolina overall, a very balanced offense that averaged 224 rushing yards per game, but more importantly, could stretch defenses vertically, averaging 262 passing yards per game. They're going to be led by a solid quarterback in Mitch Trubisky that completed 85% of his passes, 555 yards, 6 touchdowns, no interceptions. He also has weapons at his disposal. He has running back Elijah Hood that averaged 6.7 yards per carry and 17 rushing touchdowns. And he has 3 big play wide receivers, Mac Hollins, Ryan Switzer, and Bug Howard. Hollins and Switzer combined for 85 receptions, 1,442 yards, and 10 touchdowns. I think that'll put a lot of pressure on Georgia's secondary to respond. This is a Georgia defense that had problems in turnover margin last year. They were +4 overall as a unit, -2 at home, and +6 on the road. But 21 sacks as a defensive unit in 2015, which ranked 104th out of 127 teams. No Leonard Floyd, no Jordan Jenkins. I think that's the difference. And North Carolina strikes the upset in the Georgia Dome over the Bulldogs. I think it's in the area of 33 to 28. North Carolina gets the victory. Don't like the fact that a true freshman is starting in Jacob Eason. Think there'll be some growing pains, along with head coach Kirby Smart's first game as head coach. Another intriguing battle, Clemson and Auburn. Clemson's won the last 2 meetings over the Tigers, 64 to 43, a total combined score, or 10.5 points per game. Really think the difference in this matchup is the Auburn defense. This is the 3rd straight year now with a new defensive coordinator. This was a defense that allowed 26 points per game in 2015, 182 rushing yards on the ground they allowed to opposing offenses, and 222 passing yards per game to opposing quarterbacks. Auburn lost 6 ball games in 2015 to opponents with a combined overall record of 59-19. Couple that with the fact that in those 6 losses, they allowed 211 rushing yards per game. On top of that, they only recorded 19 total sacks, which ranked 104th out of 127 teams in FBS. They're going to be going up against a prolific offense led by Deshaun Watson. 11 straight games last year with over 500 yards of total offense. In 11 of the 15 games last year, Clemson rushed for over 200 yards as a team. And more importantly, in 13 of the 15 games, Clemson completed 60% of their passes. The only two games that Clemson did not complete 60% or more was in the home victory to Notre Dame and in the playoff victory over Oklahoma. Notre Dame, they completed 47%. Oklahoma, they completed 53%. I think that's the difference. I think if you take the defenses out of this ball game, I think it's going to be a tough task for Sean White and that Auburn Tiger offense to keep up with Deshaun Watson, even though they are at home. I think a lot of pressure on this Auburn Tiger team. This is a team that averaged 196 rushing yards per game, but in their 6 losses as a unit only averaged 158 yards on the ground. And you add to the fact that they only had one game in 2015 where they passed for over 300 yards of total offense. That was in the loss at home to Ole Miss. I think that's the difference. I think this game might be close early on, but in the fourth quarter, Clemson gets a decisive 17-point road victory to start their year and possibly get back to the national championship game. The Clemson dominates Auburn on the road this coming Saturday. Another intriguing matchup, LSU and Wisconsin. This is an intriguing battle. Last year, 2 years ago in 2014, Wisconsin held the third quarter lead. Entering the fourth quarter, they still had the lead, but Melvin Gordon got hurt in the end. Les Miles and LSU took over in the fourth quarter and got the 28-24 victory in Dallas. But you look at this LSU Tiger defense overall in 2015, they were suspect. They allowed 24 points per game, their highest since the 2008 season, and they allowed 224 passing yards per game, their most since prior to the 2008 season. But on the flip side, you look at this Wisconsin rushing offense over the last 3 years. In 2013, they averaged 283 yards per game. In 2014, with Melvin Gordon, they averaged 320 rushing yards per game. However, last year with Corey Clement, they dropped down significantly, only averaging 150 yards on the ground. In their 3 losses to Alabama, Northwestern, and Iowa, Wisconsin only averaged 33 rushing yards per game. I know Leonard Fournette's in a walking boot. He hasn't practiced all week. I don't think it really matters. I know there's quarterback issues with Brandon Harris, and this game is played in Lambeau, which sort of favors Wisconsin in this battle. However, I think speed is the issue on the perimeter. I don't think Wisconsin has the type of speed to keep up with wide receivers Malachi Dupree and Traven Durrell in this matchup. I think LSU has playmakers on the perimeter and puts a lot of pressure on the Wisconsin defense early on in this matchup. In the end, the offensive line and defensive lines take over. Keep in mind that former Wisconsin defensive coordinator Dave Aranda now is the defensive coordinator for the LSU Tigers. I think the LSU Tigers start fast and dominate this matchup early on. I think LSU runs away with this game. I think it's a high-scoring affair, and I think LSU pulls away for the 31-10 victory over Wisconsin in this matchup. I think it's close, maybe in the first quarter, but in the end, LSU gets a decisive 21-point victory. Another intriguing battle, Alabama and USC. Alabama's won 14 straight opening season games by an average margin of victory of 22.1 points per game. Last loss came in 2001 to the UCLA Bruins. This is an intriguing battle because this is the most athletic offense that Alabama's faced in recent years. You're talking about a USC offense that averaged 34 points per game. They rushed for 168 yards on the ground and passed for 269 yards through the air. I think Max Brown can move the football on Alabama's defense. And more importantly, I look for the wide receivers led by Juju Smith-Schuster to attack the deep middle of the third of the field on Eddie Jackson and that Alabama defense. You look at the one game that Alabama struggled last year in 2015 was at home, week number 3 against Ole Miss. Ole Miss and Chad Kelly attacked the deep third of that Alabama secondary. I think USC can do the same. I think they need to score first in this matchup and put the pressure on Alabama's offense to respond. When you look at Alabama's offense overall, they lose 30 of the team's 33 rushing touchdowns from 2015 with the loss of Derrick Henry, Kenyon Drake, and Jake Coker, coupled with the fact that Ryan Kelly, their center, moves on to the NFL. This is the first year that Alabama will be starting the year with a new center and a new quarterback. Center's responsible for all the line calls of the offensive line in terms of blitz packages and blitz pickups. That can favor USC in this matchup. You look at Nick Saban, how will new defensive coordinator Jeremy Pruitt respond in this game? He's known to have Kirby Smart at the helm, one of the best defensive coordinators in college football. Jeremy Pruitt up there with Kirby Smart, but it is his first year working with this personnel. I think that matters in this matchup as well. I think Alabama wins this game, but it is very, very close. I think USC is in striking distance from start to finish, and I think the Alabama Crimson Tide walk away with a close 3-point victory over the USC Trojans. Another intriguing matchup taking place on Saturday. It's a Conference USA and, more importantly, SEC battle. It's Southern Miss and Kentucky. Kentucky's won 10 straight opening season games by 29 points per game. You look at their defense in 2015. They only had 17 sacks as a unit, one of the worst defensive sack totals in the country last year, and more importantly, allowed 196 rushing yards per game in 2015. They're going to be starting this game with 3 sophomores in the secondary. One of those sophomores got hurt in fall camp. He's questionable for this game. I think it's a very intriguing battle that favors Southern Miss and quarterback Nick Mullins in this game. New head coach Jay Hobson was 32-17 as head coach at Alcorn State. He's a Southern Miss guy. He understands the landscape, and I do think that Southern Miss has the offense to put pressure on quarterback Drew Barker and the Wildcat offense. Patrick Towles moved on to Boston College. A lot of pressure on Drew Barker, who only completed 53% of his passes in 2015. You look at Southern Miss as well. They do have a big play running back in Ito Smith, a very balanced attack that can run the football and also put pressure on the edge of Kentucky's secondary. And I do think Southern Miss strikes the upset week 1 in Lexington. I think it's a high-scoring game, but in the end, Southern Miss gets a 34-30 victory over the Kentucky Wildcats. Another intriguing matchup taking place in College Station between Texas A&M and UCLA. If you've listened to me all season long, all off season, I've been picking Texas A&M to win the SEC West this year. I'm not backing down week number 1, even though it's a very difficult matchup against Pac-12 opponent UCLA and Josh Rosen. I look at Texas A&M overall. They get the benefit of former Oklahoma quarterback Trevor Knight and former Oklahoma running back Keith Ford in this matchup. They have possibly one of the best wide receiver corps in the nation. Leading wide receiver Christian Kirk, Josh Reynolds, Ricky Seals-Jones, Speedy Noel, who's part of that group, is not going to be playing for this ball game. He's suspended, but to me that doesn't matter. This was a group in 2015 that combined for 197 receptions, 2,702 yards, and 18 touchdowns. I think Trevor Knight's the type of quarterback that can put pressure on this UCLA defense. When you look at UCLA's defense in 2015, they allowed 198 rushing yards per game, but in their 5 losses, they allowed 220 rushing yards to their opponents. In 3 games last year, UCLA allowed 300 rushing yards or more. I think that's the difference. This is year number 2 for Texas A&M under John Chavis' system. This was a defense last year that only gave up 166 passing yards per game. They were solid in the secondary, and they registered 34 sacks as a unit. They have 2 big play defensive ends in Myles Garrett and Deshaun Hall that combined for 19.5 sacks. Even though UCLA's offensive line only allowed 14 sacks as a unit, they have to replace some key contributors of that offensive line. No Paul Perkins, no Jordan Payton, no Thomas Duarte, who led the team with 10 receiving touchdowns. And keep in mind that Noel Mazzone, who was the offensive coordinator for UCLA, now is the offensive coordinator for Texas A&M. He might have a read on personnel that'll benefit Kevin Sumlin and the offensive staff and John Chavis and the defensive staff. I like Texas A&M in this matchup. I don't think it'll be easy, but in the end, I do think Texas A&M gets a 13-point victory over UCLA. I'm calling for a 38-25 Texas A&M victory in College Station. Very difficult place to play. I think the Bruins struggle on the defensive end, keeping up with the pace of Texas A&M's offense in this matchup. Another intriguing battle taking place on Saturday, Penn State and Kent State. Doesn't seem like a big battle, but Kent State's head coach, Paul Haynes, his job is on the line. When you look at Kent State overall, they struggled last year, but they're very solid defensively. When you look at James Franklin and Penn State, a one-dimensional offense. They're going to be starting quarterback McSorley, not the same type of passer that Christian Hackenberg was. They rely a lot on Saquon Barkley and the rushing attack. But you look at Penn State's defense overall. They'll lose big play defensive tackle Austin Johnson, and more importantly, defensive end and sack leader in FBS, Carl Nassib, who led FBS with 15.5 sacks. I think that's the difference in this matchup. I think this is a very blue-collar, ugly type of game, and I think Kent State plays Penn State very, very close to the vest and is in striking distance, but in the end, Penn State picks up a 7-point victory at home. It won't be pretty, and I think Penn State struggles against Kent State on Saturday. Another intriguing battle on Sunday, Notre Dame and Texas. Very intriguing battle overall. You look at Texas in 2015, they allowed 30 points per game, their highest total since prior to 2008. They allowed 219 rushing yards per game and 233 passing yards per game, their highest total since the 2008 season when they allowed 259 passing yards per game. They're going to be starting a true freshman in Shane Buechele at the quarterback position with a new offensive scheme led by Sterling Gilbert, the former offensive coordinator for Tulsa. I look at Notre Dame overall, and I look at their quarterback situation led by Malik Zaire and Deshaun Kaiser. They're solidified at the quarterback position. They can put pressure on Texas's secondary in this matchup. Both quarterbacks, whoever gets the start, knows where they want to go with the football. I think when you look at Texas overall, if you've watched Charlie Strong in his days at Louisville, he wants to run the football between the tackles. This was a Texas offense in 2015 that averaged 224 rushing yards per game and only averaged 145 passing yards per game. You look at last year, they struggled with Tyrone Swoops and Gerard Hurd. Gerard Hurd moves to the wide receiver position. Him and John Burt are dynamic, athletic playmakers, but it still is a new quarterback in the system. I'm not sure he has his reads and progressions down. That can be a problem in this matchup, especially if Notre Dame jumps up early in this game. I know Texas, they made some adjustments, but again, this is not the type of offense that Charlie Strong wants to run. I think it bites them in this ball game, and I think Notre Dame has the offensive advantage in Austin. I think they start fast, and in the end, Notre Dame gets a 14-point victory over Texas, 38-24. Brian Kelly and the crew start their national title hopes with a dominant road victory over Texas in Austin in this matchup. Monday night's game, intriguing matchup, Florida State and Ole Miss. DeAndre Francois will get the start in this ball game going up against a suspect Ole Miss secondary. You look at Ole Miss overall in 2015, this was a team that won 10 ball games by 27 points per game. Their 3 losses to Memphis, Arkansas, and Florida, they lost those ball games by 14 points per game. This was a secondary in those 3 losses that allowed 365 passing yards per game and 13 passing touchdowns. There's a lot of opportunity for Florida State in this matchup with their wide receivers, Travis Rudolph, Jesus Wilson, and Kermit Whitfield, who combined for 174 receptions, 2,336 yards, and 16 receiving touchdowns. There's only one question mark in this ballgame. Wilson and Rudolph are both nicked up in this battle. Rudolph has a hamstring injury, and Wilson has a foot injury. How does that affect them in this matchup along with the fact that DeAndre Francois is a redshirt freshman. I know he's a 4-star recruit from IMG, but again, if you're asking me, I go with the more experienced quarterback in Chad Kelly and Ole Miss. Don't think it'll be easy, but I do think that Ole Miss is in this game from start to finish. This was an offense in 2015 that averaged 183 rushing yards per game, and they averaged 334 passing yards per game, led by Chad Kelly. Chad Kelly completed 65% of his passes, 4,042 yards, 31 passing touchdowns, and he added 10 rushing touchdowns. He has a big play wide receiver in Stringfellow. He also has a big play tight end in Evan Ingram. They could be in this game from start to finish. Derwin James has not practiced for the last week now for Florida State. Derwin James, the big play safety for the Seminoles. How does that affect this defense entering this matchup? We'll have to see. Florida State dropped 3 games last year to Clemson, Georgia Tech, and Houston. Those teams were a combined 30-11 overall, and more importantly, in those ball games, the Florida State defense allowed 221 rushing yards per game. I don't think this is an easy game for Florida State, even though the game is played in the Citrus Bowl. I think Ole Miss strikes the upset. I think it's close, but in the end, Ole Miss kicks a field goal and wins 33-30 over the Seminoles. We're just getting started. Stay with me all season long at GoForThe2.com.